This video is about adjusting the chassis in a Beogram 4000. The goal here is to get the platter flush with the surrounding aluminum panel. For more information, please visit my blog at beolover.blogspot.com or go to my website at www.beolover.com. This shows the relevant section of the service manual for this adjustment. Now, please note that prior to this adjustment, the platter height and vertical alignment relative to the chassis need to be adjusted properly. There is a separate video about this in the playlist. Here we adjust the chassis now, and so we want to adjust it that the platter is flush and parallel to the surrounding aluminum plate. And so in order to do that, we have three adjustment points where we can adjust the chassis height relative to the enclosure. This is done by adjusting these bolts up and down. Now here we have two nuts. The lower nut is attached to the bolt and the upper nut we can loosen. And so you simply take a wrench, hold the lower end here tight, and then with the long socket you crack this upper nut a little bit open. It's good to keep them very close to this spring and then move the upper nut together with the bolt. That will keep the spring down and close to this lower nut, which in the end defines the adjustment. This can be done very nicely by using a screwdriver that fits through this long socket that you use to adjust the nut here, and then simply with one hand you turn the socket and with the other hand you turn the screwdriver, and that keeps that nut always close to the spring, and so it is not loose here between the two nuts. That makes the adjustment much simpler. Now, one thing needs to be kept in mind while doing this adjustment. Of course, as you adjust the chassis up and down, it is possible to touch either of the limits of the transport lock. So the transport lock here is shown opened up, right? So the chassis is floating in between, but as you adjust it, it goes up and down. And so they prescribe here a gap of 2 millimeters. In my experience, this is not only difficult to measure, but it is also not possible really to do the 2 millimeters exactly, because once you adjust the height of the platter relative to the chassis and then the chassis relative to the aluminum plate, there's no degree of freedom left to get this adjustment here properly. And so I wouldn't be too concerned about this if the chassis is not entirely in the center. It is more important that everything is flush with the top of the turntable to make it look great, as long as the chassis is still floating freely between the two limits of the transport lock. As soon as you touch, of course, then you don't have the vibration damping anymore. So the tools that you need for this adjustment is that 7mm long socket, and you need the screwdriver that fits through it, and you also need a 7mm wrench that you can hold that lower nut while you open or tighten the upper nut. Here's a view of the Beogram with the plates taken out, and so you see here these are the 1, 2, 3 adjustment points. So we're talking now about adjusting these bolts here. Okay, so the first step is to crack this nut here a little bit open, and that gets us ready for the adjustment. So you put the 7mm wrench down there, and then with the long socket you open that nut a little. Okay, and now it's time for the adjustment. So you put the screwdriver through the socket and then put both on the bolt and the nut, and then turn both together. And so you see here now how the platter and the carriage move relative to the aluminum plate. And so the task is now to get this here adjusted on all three sides, that everything is flush and level. The best way to check is with your finger, so it just needs to feel real nice and smooth. One more thing, it's not only important that the platter is flush, but it should also sit centered within the aluminum plate that surrounds it. And so for that, one can adjust these entire springs here a little bit forth and back through this oblong hole that is around this pin. One thing here to consider, never bend this pin, because the upper end is supposed to hold the aluminum plate in its precisely defined position. Okay, let's do it. So you can just use some cardboard or so to protect your finger and then shift this a little bit. So after all three springs are adjusted, it's time to tighten the upper nuts again. And so you use the 7mm wrench and hold against here, and then you tighten this here with the ratchet. And so if you're lucky, then everything is still flush after tightening here. If not, then you have to do this again. And here we go. Beautiful. A perfectly flush platter. Now you know how to adjust the chassis in a Beogram 4000. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.